Great, thank you. The other reason I think it's important for this debate to be an extensive and interconnected debate, I'm reminded at this meeting I was describing, Tony Hammett referred to a quote of Thomas Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog, and it's not that long ago that Huxley said that any tendency to overfishing will meet with its natural check in the diminution of supply. We advise that all acts of Parliament which profess to regulate or restrict the modes of fishing pursued in the open sea be repealed, and that unrestricted freedom of fishing be permitted hereafter. That's only a century ago, or a century and a half. So, Carlo, I forgot to mention, of course, that Nancy was originally at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, about other places, and is now the Sant Chair for Marine Science at the Smithsonian Institute. So spends her time going up to the Hill in Washington trying to explain some of this stuff to senators and their staffs. Carlo Hype, Director of the Royal Netherlands Institute of Sea Research. Do you have the same picture? Do you guys disagree on anything, or is it just...
Well, I'm afraid both us and the audience here, to a large extent, do not disagree on many points. But to come back to Carl's introduction, I think the four areas that he mentioned are more or less encompass the major problems that we face, and I think also the problems about which society can do something. But in order to move society, of course, you need information, and I think the role of science in providing that information is extremely important, especially in the oceans. In the oceans, of course, as we also learned yesterday, we are far away from land. I think 99% of the people only perceive the oceans as closer to the beaches at most. And even people who live on the oceans, like the maritime transport people, only scratch the surface of the oceans. So the largest part, the bulk of the biosphere, we talk about 70% of the surface of the Earth, but it's 90% of the biosphere, because in volume it's also huge. We don't know, even with people who are experienced to travel on the surfaces. And I think perhaps fishermen to some extent, the offshore exploration people, they go a little bit deeper, and it's only the science who goes, let's say, far enough to give this picture of the oceans as a whole. So I think this is one of the roles, especially in the ocean, that science can play. Now, I made a little list of what science can do and what science cannot do. And I think yesterday as well, one of the, what does the people don't know about the oceans? And one thing that struck me yesterday, and what was missing, in fact, is that besides coral reefs, of course, that most of the oceans is microbial. The big biogeochemical cycles, all the processes that we talk about, nitrogen, carbon, climate, it's all being done by the microbes. This is a message we missed yesterday to some extent. And I think the main problem is that we cannot do anything about microbes, that we can exploit them, we can study them, but we cannot regulate them. So we have a problem there of governance, and I think this should not, of course, prevent us from taking care of the oceans, but we miss a large part there. So I think this is factual information. Only science can provide that information, and marine science and oceanography is a very expensive science, so we need, of course, to convince society that we need it. We also need the technology. Science has to develop the technology in order to be able to explore the oceans. Also, this is extremely difficult. We heard yesterday as well that there are only a few submarines and a few ROVs who go very deep, at least in the scientific community, whereas the offshore industry apparently has hundreds, so that's perhaps something where we could work together. So technology for the oceans is important, and science, of course, is to give the kind of context in which technology has to be developed. Not only science, of course, also exploitation, what have you. I think also what science has to do is to explain. First of all, science has to develop a coherent body of knowledge. We cannot understand the oceans piece by piece. We have to have a kind of picture of the oceans as a whole. So we need, as scientists, to work together. We have to be multidisciplinary in our approach. We have to have scientific research not on a monodisciplinary basis, but all together. I think, to some extent, ocean science is an example of that, because we all go on vessels. Many of us go on vessels together, so we at least know how to talk to each other. So there is a lot to say about the specificity of ocean science. I think also, if you go to a more broader context, what scientists are able to do, and should do, is to arouse curiosity, to make people aware of how fascinating the oceans really are, to explore the oceans, to give this information, and to communicate this. I think this is one of the extremely important roles of science, to give information on what's happening. And of course, the areas in which this information is needed have been listed already by Carl. I will not go into to repeat that. Now to the side of the things we cannot do, the frustrations that we have. I think one of the frustrations that you feel is that, of course, the voice of science is only one of the many voices that's in the debate on how to govern and how to manage and how to exploit and explore the oceans. And scientists, to some extent, are to blame themselves, because science, of course, is not a democratic process, and it is very difficult to achieve consensus on a scientific issue. And the climate one is a nice example. Of course, IPCC got a Nobel Prize, so they are supposed to have a kind of consensus view on climate. But on the other hand, we still have people in many countries who are climate skeptics, and they are also scientists, and they voice different opinions, and we do not seem to achieve in such a difficult situation the possibility to have a single opinion. Yes, you want to comment on that?
Could I ask you to elaborate just one thing there? You said science is not a democratic process. Yeah. Surely the publication, peer review, and at least science is as close as you can get to an agreed best testing of hypotheses and facts. You meant that once the democratic process of science has produced a scientific paper, sometimes those papers are misused by people who would like to make a case.
No, that's not what I mean. I think in democracy, the majority is the boss. So in science, you can have 100 scientists who have an opinion, and a single scientist who has another opinion, but a single scientist may be right. So that's something we have to be careful with, that a majority of opinions is not necessarily the right opinion or the right interpretation or the right factor. So that's something why you do not achieve consensus so easily in a scientific community, and you have different forces. And these things are exploited sometimes. You have companies who have scientists in their service, and you have governments, and you have universities, and they all have some different context, and they perhaps say different things at some time.